I'm completely torn apart by what's happening in my family right now, and I need outside perspective because I genuinely don't know if I'm being insensitive or if my family's requests are unreasonable. My sister Emma and I have always had a complicated relationship. Growing up, she was intensely competitive with me over everything: grades, friends, appearance, attention from our parents. If I achieved something, she had to do it better. If I got something new, she needed the same thing but more expensive. This dynamic has followed us into adulthood, though I've tried to maintain a cordial relationship despite it. Emma got married 2 years ago to her college sweetheart. I'm 28 and met my husband later in life. We just celebrated our first anniversary. Emma announced her pregnancy immediately after our wedding, which didn't surprise me given her pattern of one-upmanship. I was genuinely happy for her though and tried to be supportive throughout her pregnancy. Sadly, Emma lost her baby at 24 weeks. It was devastating for her and the entire family. I can't imagine the pain she experienced, and I've tried to be there for her as much as possible, bringing meals, checking in regularly, giving her space when needed. Her loss happened about 6 months ago, and she's still understandably grieving. 3 months ago, my husband and I discovered I was pregnant. We hadn't been actively trying yet, but we weren't preventing it either. We were overjoyed, but also immediately concerned about how Emma would take the news. We decided to wait until the 12-week mark to tell anyone, and to tell Emma privately before making any public announcement. When we reached the 12-week mark, I invited Emma for coffee, just the two of us. I gently told her our news, acknowledged that this might be painful for her to hear, and assured her that I would understand if she needed space or time to process. I tried to be as sensitive as possible. Her initial reaction seemed measured. She congratulated me stiffly and said she was happy for us. But later that night, she called our mother hysterical, saying I was flaunting my pregnancy in her face and had deliberately gotten pregnant to hurt her. My mother then called me, suggesting I should have waited longer to tell Emma and asking if I could keep things low-key to avoid triggering Emma's grief. I agreed to be mindful of Emma's feelings, thinking that meant not constantly talking about the pregnancy around her. But over the following weeks, my family's definition of low-key became increasingly restrictive. First, my mother asked me not to post any pregnancy announcements or updates on social media because Emma might see them. Then, when planning my baby shower, my mother suggested we call it a couples party instead and not mention the baby. When I refused, saying I was excited to celebrate this milestone, my mother said I should at least not invite any mutual friends or family members who knew about Emma's loss. The situation came to a head last week when we found out we're having a girl. My husband and I were so excited that we called our parents immediately to share the news. My mother's first response was, "Please don't tell Emma. She was having a boy, and knowing you're having a girl might make her feel like she's missing out on a daughter too." That request hit me hard. They were asking me to hide fundamental aspects of my pregnancy and upcoming motherhood, potentially for months or even years. I finally pushed back, saying that while I deeply sympathized with Emma, I shouldn't have to hide my joy or miss out on celebrating this important time in my life. My mother became upset, saying I was being selfish and insensitive to Emma's real grief compared to my momentary happiness. My father then called to say they were canceling the family baby shower they'd planned, despite the earlier negotiations about its format, because Emma had broken down at the thought of attending. He suggested I could have a small celebration with just my husband's family instead. When I objected, saying this was my first child too and I deserved to celebrate with my whole family, my father sighed and said, "Emma lost her child. You still have yours. You need to be the bigger person here." I've since received messages from various family members telling me that pregnancy announcements can be extremely triggering for women who have experienced loss, and that if I truly loved my sister, I would understand her need not to be confronted with my pregnancy. My aunt even suggested I should spend the next 5 months wearing loose clothing at family gatherings and not mentioning the baby, to give Emma space to heal. I absolutely recognize the deep trauma of pregnancy loss, and I want to support Emma through her grief, but I'm starting to feel like my family expects me to basically pretend I'm not pregnant for the rest of my term, which feels like an impossible ask. I'm showing now and will only get more visibly pregnant. This is my first child, and I've looked forward to experiencing the joy and celebration that comes with bringing new life into the world. My husband thinks my family's requests are unreasonable and that they're enabling Emma's unhealthy coping mechanisms rather than encouraging her to seek proper grief counseling. He's suggested we distance ourselves from my family until after the baby is born if they continue to make these demands. But the thought of navigating this pregnancy without my family's support is heartbreaking to me. Am I the a-hole for refusing to hide my pregnancy? Should I be making more accommodations for my sister's grief, even if it means missing out on traditional pregnancy milestones and celebrations? I truly want to be compassionate, but I'm struggling to find the right balance. Update. Thank you all for your supportive comments and perspective. After reading through everyone's advice, I had a long conversation with my husband about healthy boundaries. We decided to take a stand together. I called my parents and explained that while I deeply sympathize with Emma's loss, completely hiding my pregnancy wasn't a reasonable solution. I told them I would continue to be sensitive around Emma, not discussing pregnancy details in her presence unless she asks, giving her space when needed, but I would not pretend this pregnancy doesn't exist, cancel celebrations, or avoid family gatherings. I also suggested that perhaps Emma might benefit from grief counseling, specifically for pregnancy loss, offering to help find resources or even help financially if needed. This suggestion wasn't well received initially, with my mother saying I was implying something was wrong with Emma's grief. The conversation ended tensely, but 3 days later my father called back. He admitted they may have been overprotective of Emma and apologized for making me feel my pregnancy couldn't be acknowledged. He said they'd had a family discussion, and while Emma was still struggling, she had agreed to start seeing a therapist specialized in pregnancy loss. My mother has since reached out about rescheduling a modified baby shower. It will be smaller than originally planned, and Emma may choose not to attend, which I completely understand. But it's a step toward acknowledging that both Emma's grief and my joy can exist simultaneously. Emma and I had a brief but civil conversation last weekend. She admitted she's been finding it difficult to process her feelings about my pregnancy, but also said she doesn't want to miss being an aunt to my daughter. I told her I respect whatever boundaries she needs to set for herself during this time, and that my door is always open whenever she feels comfortable being more involved. Things aren't perfect, and navigating family gatherings still requires care and consideration. But I'm no longer being asked to hide my pregnancy, and I feel like my parents are starting to recognize that supporting one daughter doesn't have to mean diminishing the other's experience. Thank you again for helping me find clarity during this emotional time. Setting these boundaries was difficult but necessary, not just for me and my baby, but ultimately for Emma's healing process as well.